Hi, and welcome back to the Repair Panda. Today we're working on a PR400. It has a similar design as a CP200 with a few extra parts, such as having a flex connector down here at the bottom to connect a keyboard and a screen. What we're focusing on today is going to be the accessory jack here. It's a little loose. I mean, it works, it does its job, but when you connect your external speaker to it, you can feel that it's not a very good, tight connection. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this prepped up and ready to remove this jack right here. It's a two-prong jack for Motorola. This is the same jack as a CP200 as is on this PR400. So the method I'm going to show you in this video is going to be able to be worked on both a PR400 and a CP200 as well. So let's get started. First thing we'll do is set the board up in our PCB holder here. All right. So now that we have our PCB board and our holder, we're going to take a look at this accessory jack here. So as you can see, we have a pin here, a pin here. There's a pin in the middle, like you may not be able to see. There's a pin right here, point from the other direction. A pin here, a pin back here. Let's see, this one. You have this pin right here. And then there's one more in the middle right here. So in total, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pins to remove. And what I do is I get our flux and I go around to each pin, add a little flux to it, just so it has a little flux while we heat it up with our heat gun. Now what I do is, because we don't want to melt this piece of plastic, this is where the retainer clip for your microphone goes in. And then this is plastic, and we don't want to heat any and melt any of this stuff. So what we're going to do is I have a shield off of a non-working radio that I just pulled off, and we're just going to cover that. So the heat doesn't really get too bad on those components. Next, I'm going to take my fine tip tweezers and put them into the two accessory port holes. From there, we're going to take heat gun that is set to 100% at 800 degrees. And yes, in previous videos, I've mentioned to not really go up above 750. This is just to speed it up, so don't do what I do. That saying is like, do as I say, not as I do. I've been doing this for almost 6 years now. I know what these boards can actually withstand. But what we want to do is just go back and forth with our heat real quick and start heating up the board. And this is where a fume extractor comes in at play as well, because you're basically melting the plastic off while you heat this up. So make sure you have a fume extractor to extract the melting plastic fumes and the fumes from the solder being heated up, along with whatever else is on the board, if it's a dirty board. All right, now that we have it a little bit heated up, I can just go back and forth on the first top three here, closest to my tweezers. And then we just go back and forth. And then eventually you can start wiggling your tweezers very, very gently. And you'll notice that the pins will start become loose. And once you notice that, it's where you start going back into the circle and get those back pins. All the while you keep bringing heat into the front as well. We're going to focus more on the back now. There we go. The pins in the middles are usually the hardest ones to get going. There we go. Just gently rock it back and forth. And voila, you now have a accessory jack removed. So we can throw this away. We can take our heat shield off here. And as you can see, none of the plastic pieces over here melted, so that's always good. And now we can take the board out of our holder, set it back down, and from here, what I do is I clean up the pads here with a soldering gun. You can use a braid if you want. I just find it easier to use a desoldering gun. And there you go. Now we clean up the flux that we have on there. Make it all nice. There we go. And there you go. You have successfully removed the accessory jack and not damaged any of these solder points. So you're now halfway there. So the other side of it is now there's putting it back on. Putting it back on, all you gotta do is line it up and solder on. Though some people, depending on your soldering setup, it could be a little hard to get into these top places right here for these pins up here. So luckily, if you notice, this volume pot here is a little dated, and you can see that it's starting to fall apart here. Or at least I can. I don't know if you can see the gap. So you can see the gap in the volume pot here, in between the knob and the. Let's see here. There you go. There it is. So you can see the gap there. That shouldn't be there. So we're going to remove the volume pot as well. And it just gets a little bit easier without the volume pot there. So we're going to remove the volume pot as well because of that gap. And it gets a little bit easier to solder off these two top points without that volume pot there. If you don't need to remove it, you can finagle and do different angles to get to those 2 points. But for our purpose today, we're going to remove that because it's failing and it's starting to come apart. So we're going to remove that volume pot as well. And all I do is heat up the circles of solder points, melt a little new solder on there just to be safe. And by safe, I mean have it a little bit easier to suck up the old software. I don't know why I said safe. It's more making it easier to suck up the old solder than making it safe. Then we get our 2 anchor points up here. These 2 pieces right here. All right. Now, let me just get our rock it back and forth, and it comes right out. Now we just clean it up a little bit. There we go. All right, now with the volume pot out of the way, again, you don't have to remove it if it's a good volume pot. This one is starting to fail. Make sure that you have the right one. You want the small, so as long as the channel selector is pointed away from you, you want the small hole on the bottom and the larger hole on the top. All right. So let's get started. We'll add a little bit of flux to the pads. Now that it cooled off a little bit so the flux doesn't automatically melt. All right, now that we have a little bit of flux, we'll put the accessory jack back on. And with the volume pot out of the way here, you can come in and just get right next to it. What I do is I hold it down as firm as possible while I put the first amount of solder on one of the pins, and then I come back and just do all the rest of the pins. We'll do the 2 middle ones last because those are a lot more difficult to do. I always use the board to my advantage. By that, I mean I move the board and not use my soldering hand to get the weird angles. So for the front side, middle right here, what I do is I just lay down the tip onto the point I want to solder and melt and twist. That way it goes on. And you take a quick look, it looks fantastic. Now the back way is kind of the same way. I lay it down as flat as possible on there, let it heat up, and just put the solder on top, and then move it around to make sure it is melted and connected. Come on. I did not want to. There we go. And it's not the best, but it is there. And of course, I always give it a little scrub down to remove any of the flux that may still be a residue. And then we'll go ahead and put the volume pot back on and solder these. I solder ankle point first, and then I come back and put solder on all the pins that are through the through holes, and then I do the last ankle point. And this is similar to the 6000s. When I did that, I come back through and just make sure that it looks really nice and clean with by just holding the desoldering gun on top of it for a second, and then we'll clean it off. And there you go. We now have a new accessory jack, a new volume pot on there, and the radio is ready to be put back together and sent back out to the client. And there you go. That's it. Thanks for watching in this episode. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video. Have a good weekend.